O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father, and refuse thy name. Or if thou wilt not, be but my sworn love, and I will no longer be a Capulet. 'Tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What's a Montague? It is not a hand, nor a foot, nor an arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Would it though? Would it really? That is the topic of my video today. Naming magic and how to use it in a fantasy world. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. If you like these kinds of topics, please do hit the subscribe button. And if you want to help me keep making more of these videos, you can hit my Ko-fi page in the link down below, or you can buy my books available on Amazon.com. And thank you very much to all of my supporters who make making these videos a lot easier. Okay, let's crack on. So first, let's talk about the historical origins of naming magic. Now, naming magic probably originated somewhere with the Greek philosophers, maybe even as far back as Pythagoras himself, triangle guy. Back then, it was called onomancy, which is predicting the future with names and numbers. And it was the reason why you would have soothsayers that would help you pick the name for your child so that you didn't pick an ill-omened name, because names were predictive of the future. This prediction of the future then got incorporated into some of Plato's philosophies, especially where he spoke about looking past the shadows to the true reality behind the thing and being able to name that. And if you can see that thing that lies beyond the shadows, then you can manipulate it. And that was the Greek philosophies that probably gave rise to the kind of naming magic we see in folklore. From the Greek origins, naming magic spread outward, and it eventually reached Norway, where it gave rise to a folklore monster called the Nick, which is a Norwegian monster that lives in ponds, and normally you can only see its eyes, but it can turn into a beautiful young man who tricks young women into the pond and then drowns them, or into a white horse that children can ride, and then it rides with the children into the pond. If the snake attacked you, you could counterattack by saying its name, and then it would have to let you go. So if you knew the snake's name and you said it correctly, then you overcame it. You had power over the fairy tale monster. So you had some direct folklore power with names, but you also had power just by knowing something's name. And you can see an example of that in the fairy tale Rumpelstiltskin, which is probably one of our oldest fairy tales, and it has been speculated that in some versions of it go back as far as 4,000 years. Now, the Rumpelstiltskin fairy tale is that there's a girl who falls in love with a prince, and she says that she can spin straw into gold. She can't, but the king says, well, if you can do that, then you can marry my son, and if you can't do that, I'm going to chop your head off. So she then is crying because she can't spin straw into gold, and Rumpelstiltskin comes to her and he says, well, I'll offer you a deal. I will spin the straw into gold if you give me, your necklace. And then she does it, and then the king wants another room full, and then she gives Rumpelstiltskin her ring, and then he does it, and then finally she has nothing left to give him, but she still has one more room that has to be spun straw from gold, and Rumpelstiltskin says, okay, well, I'll take your firstborn child. She agrees, and Rumpel does the spinning, and she marries the prince, and she falls pregnant, and then Rumpelstiltskin comes back, and he wants the child. And then she looks for a way out of it, and Rumpel says, well, if you can guess my name, I'll let you out the deal. And then she figures out a way to get to know his name, and so gets out of the deal, just by knowing his name. And you can see why knowing somebody's name holds power. I mean, we can see it in our own world. If you know somebody's online name, and you know their real name, you hold a certain amount of power over them. You can dox them. It's a terrible thing to do, but you can do it. It gives you power over them. It's the same as a superhero's identity, as we saw with the Spider-Man movie. If you know a superhero's true identity, you hold power over them because you can harm them with that knowledge. And so knowledge of who somebody is a powerful thing. And then the last folklore type application is where names themselves hold power. So they don't hold power over the thing, but speaking the name is like speaking a magical word. And you can see that in the Hebrew folklore around the name of God, where the name of God itself is held to be so powerful that speaking it gives you power over creation. And this was used by Jacqueline Carey in the Kashil Avatar books, where the name of God gave you power over the angels. And Phedre went on an entire quest to find that name, to be granted the ability to speak it once and only once, in order to dismiss the angel that is holding her childhood friend captive in a tower. So it was an incredible story to find this name and then speak it once in order to lift the curse that was holding her childhood friend there. So if you enjoyed that exploration of naming magic in folklore and in history, hit the thumbs up button, and let's talk about some fantastical examples. So like we saw with the Nake monster from Norway, there is often an element in fantasy where you say, okay, a name, when attached to a non-human creature, gives you power over that non-human creature. And this is how Jim Butcher uses naming magic in the Dresden Files. So if you know a demon's name, you can summon them. You can bind them to your will. If you know a fairy's name, you can summon them and you can maybe try to bind them to your will. It doesn't always work out that well for you, depending on the power level we're talking about. There's one instance where Dresden summons some creatures by saying their name that he really is not all that cut out to deal with. And it doesn't always end well for him. But regardless, you can summon such creatures by saying their name. Now, the interesting thing is, it does influence human wizards as well, but it doesn't affect them as much as it affects fairies and demons and other creatures. And the reason why is because in the Dresden universe, it is said that humans are always changing. So because humans alter, it changes their identity, and the name is the expression of their identity. And hence, the changing nature of humans protects them from the full force of naming magic. And that's also why creatures are more easily summoned, because they tend to be more elemental, more unchanging. So in the Dresden universe, names become symbolic of the thing. It is the identity of the thing. It almost ties into kind of sympathetic magic, where the symbol, the name, stands in place of the actual thing. Catherine Kerr uses a similar kind of thing. Specifically, where she uses naming magic is there is a dragon who can be bound with their name. So dragons specifically can be bound with their names. And what she does here, like Jacqueline Carey, is she goes around the quest to actually find the name and figure out how to pronounce it, because you have to pronounce it right. That is, it's all tied into the identity of the creature. So she has a character that has this ring with a name engraved on it. And the character first has to figure out that it is a name. Then they have to actually travel to the people who created the ring so that they can hear how they pronounce that name, so that they can learn how to pronounce it correctly, so that eventually the ring can be used in order to bind the dragon. So in both of those cases, it was around names as binding magic, names being used to bind a creature or to control a creature. But I can hardly discuss naming magic without talking about Ursula Le Guin. So in Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea world, all magic is dependent on naming magic. If you know the true name of something, be it a wizard, a boat, a tree, anything, you can manipulate it. It gives you command over that thing. And that is why people use nicknames. So the hero of Earthsea, Ged, is his true name. But people call him Sparrowhawk because that's his use name. What I love about the way that Ursula Le Guin uses naming magic is that it ties into the thematic elements of her stories. So the story that really brings this to the fore is the Tombs of Atuan. In this story, there's a young girl who's believed to be the priestess of Atuan, and she loses her name, and the priests rename her as Arha. And she's supposed to grow up into the reincarnated priestess. Then Sparrowhawk comes and she captures him. But instead of killing him or handing him over to the priests or anything like that, she learns from him. He becomes a mentor to her. And he says to her, you can stay here and be this Arhu, but is that who you are? And he helps her reclaim her name, her true name, which is Tenar, and he helps her escape from the Tombs of Atuan to lead the life that she should be leading. The discovery of her name is the discovery of her identity, is her taking control of her life. It is her taking agency in her life. And that ties into not just the naming system, the magic system, but also into the thematic exploration of what is identity and why does it matter that you know who you are and that you choose who you are. And that is why whenever I think of naming magic, the foremost example is always Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea series. Okay, so if you're going to use naming magic in your world, couple of things to think about. Does the name give power, or is the name power, or is it just that you have power because you have the name? So it's a case of, is it Rumpelstiltskin, so knowing the name gives you power? Or is it like a fairy tale monster like the Nake, where saying the name gives you power over the thing? Or is it like the name of God, where saying the name is power? Can you name concepts instead of people? For example, can you say cut and then you cause somebody to be cut as though they had been hit with a sword? I.e., is this actually a magical language rather than naming per se? If names hold power, how do people protect themselves? Do they have nicknames? Do they have use names? Do they have rituals that defend themselves against names? And if you're going to use naming magic, I think that for it to be as impactful as the potential for it is, you should tie it into your theme. Identity and the discovery thereof and the claiming thereof should in some way be tied into the thematic elements of your story. And then your naming magic will truly sing, because it will speak to the user not just on the magical level, but also in the thematic and storytelling elements. And those are my thoughts on naming magic in a fantasy world. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button and maybe check out my video on using music for magic. And if you want to connect around this or any other topic, do remember that I do have a Discord server linked down below. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time World.